Practice questions for Module 4. So here we have a few questions that pertain to the material covered in Module 4. The first 6 questions are about shifts of supply and demand, either both together, one or the other, and us trying to predict the impact on equilibrium price and quantity, all in the market for wheat. And then the last 2 questions are about calculating equilibrium price and quantity for given functions. So to start off with the first one, the first case is, so we're in the market for wheat here, and the first case is that we have a new type of seed that reduces the production cost. So let me get some space here. And we're starting from an equilibrium. And now we have an impact. So first let's finish this. There's price and there's quantity. We have a supply function, we have a demand function. And now we have a new type of seed that reduces production costs. Now remember, the supply function is the one that covers production cost as well as expected profits. So if production costs go down, then for a given price, the same equilibrium price, that's the starting point, right? We should see more people willing to supply the product. And so that implies that the supply function shifts to the right. Now, of course, the price will not stay constant. The price will eventually go down because supply increase and there aren't enough people who want to buy at the price of P star. So we're moving to a new equilibrium point, call that P prime. And that implies that the original Q star quantity also changes to Q prime. So the prediction would be that the price will decrease, which makes sense because there are more suppliers in the market now, and the quantity will go up, which also makes sense because, well, the price went down and the cost went down. Now, how about the next one? People develop a taste for bread. For some bread, wheat is a primary ingredient. And so if we draw the situation, we have price and quantities to start off, we have supply, we have demand. If people want to have more bread, then there is an increased demand for those who produce bread for the ingredients, right? So if you produce bread and you face a higher demand for bread, that means bread becomes more valuable as something to produce, as a good to produce, which means that in the market for wheat, which is an ingredient to bread, the demand will increase. Who are the demanders here? Well, the firms that produce bread. Who are the suppliers? Those are the farmers. So in that case, we would expect that from the original price and quantity, we now have an increase in both of them. So we would expect the price to go up and the quantity to go up. The quantity goes up, the price goes up because there is additional demand. If the price didn't change, there would be even more of an increase in quantity, but because the price is going up, it's a moderate increase in quantity. What about the income increasing? And here we have to kind of understand something about the good. We have to know whether it's a normal good or an inferior good. In this case, we can assume that wheat is a normal good, in which case an increase in income will increase the demand for wheat. So it's a right shift, and for right shift, of the demand function, we would expect that the quantity goes up as well as the price. So same situation as under C. How about farmers are faced with more intense regulation? So again, supply and demand, more intense regulation means that it's more cumbersome to produce, perhaps more expensive to produce. So the supply function should shift to the left, right? For a given price, there should be fewer people, fewer farmers now out who are willing to produce. And so there should be this decrease. If we do that for every possible price, then we can derive the new supply function. Now with this new supply function, we can see that the price is expected to go up and the quantity is expected to go down. So question E is a little bit more complicated because we have two things happening at the same time. So let's start off with our supply and demand. Now, the first thing is the reduced interest rates. What would be affected by reduced interest rates? So if we think about a farmer, if you want to produce on a farm, you need various things. You need the land, you need machines, presumably. You're not going to do it by hand. You might need some storage facility where you can store the harvest. All of that costs money. Where do you get the money from? Well, either you have the money, but if you don't, you have to borrow the money. And if you borrow the money, then you have to pay interest on that. So the interest rate certainly plays a role. And even if you have your money, how does the interest rate matter? Well, here is the concept of opportunity cost relevant, because you could do something else with the money if the interest rate was higher. So you could lend it to somebody else at a higher interest rate, for instance. And so no matter what, the interest rate should play a role. And a reduced interest rate implies that production gets cheaper. So we have S prime. At the same time, people are moving toward rye products instead of wheat products. So that means that the demand for wheat should decrease. So now we have two things happening at the same time. Our original equilibrium was at P star and Q star. The new equilibrium is at P prime and Q prime. Now, it would be tempting to conclude that this is straightforward, but it's not. So we know for sure that price went down. And in fact, it went down quite a bit because both factors exert downward pressure on the price, right? So the right shift of the supply tends to decrease the price, as does a left shift of the demand. So both of them decrease the price. But when it comes to quantity, these go in opposite directions. A decrease in the right shift of the supply function due to a reduced cost will tend to increase quantity, whereas a left shift of demand tends to decrease the quantity. In my graph, the quantity went down. Right? So quantity went down in the graph. But if I had just shifted these functions differently, for example, what if instead I had drawn it like this? In that case, we clearly would have an increase in the quantity, still a decrease in the price. So what this tells us is that we really don't know. We really don't know about the quantity. We know for sure about the price. The price goes down. The quantity change is uncertain or ambiguous. Right, so we don't know for sure what's gonna happen there. The next example is gonna be similar. Again, we have multiple things happening at the same time. Let's take a look. Price, quantity, supply, and demand. So the first factor is an increase in the cost of wheat production due to a dry summer. So it gets more expensive. That would imply a left shift of the supply function. But then we also have that income decreases. Now, if we again consider wheat as a normal product, then this would be a left shift of the demand function. What we can conclude is P star, prime, Q star, and Q prime. We know for sure that quantity decreased. So quantity going down, we are certain about that. Price is a little bit more ambiguous because it depends on how much these functions shift. For example, what I have drawn right here is that price actually went up. But I could easily draw this differently. For example, if I drew the demand function over here, then the new equilibrium would be down here, in which case price would have gone down. So as before, we are certain about quantity, but we are uncertain about the change in price. And the reasoning, again, is it depends on the relative magnitude of the shifts. If the supply function shifts more than the demand, then the price will go up. If the demand function shifts more than the supply, then the price will go down. Well, that's something to keep in mind. Now, moving on to the math questions. Let me first draw a graph. And I'm going to choose a different thickness here. Okay. Price, quantity. Let's put in what we know. So this is the demand function. I know it starts at 100. That's the intercept. Not the first number is the intercept. And then the slope is -2. That's the coefficient in front of the q, including the sign. The supply function starts at 10 and has a slope of +1. And there's a 1 in front, the q, and a plus sign. What we're trying to do is find these 2 points, the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. How do we do this? All we need to do is set supply equal to demand. Now, supply equal demand, we could set the prices equal, but that wouldn't get us anywhere. So instead, we set the right-hand side of the equation equal. So 100 minus 2q equals to 10 plus q. Then we rearrange things. We take the -2 to the other side and the 10 to this side, which gives us 90 equal 3q. And then q is equal to 30, 90 divided by 3. So we know the quantity is 30. How do we get the price? We plug the quantity into either one of the equations. In fact, this is a way to double check yourself. If the answers are not the same, whether you plug it into demand or supply, then you did something wrong. And so in our case, we have let's say plug it into the supply function. We have price equal to 10 plus 30, which is 40. You can also plug in the demand function, price equal to 100 minus 2 times 30 is also 40. So price is 40. And that solves question 2. And then the last question is once more a math question. So let me first draw the graph. Price and quantity, supply, demand. The intercept we know is 80 and 20 respectively. And then we have a slope of -6 for demand and +4 for supply. Notice the way I drew it, the slopes look very much the same, but that's just because I didn't pay attention when I drew it. I could slightly adjust this, make the demand function slightly steeper and the supply function slightly less steep, and then it would be approximately right. But I don't care about those details too much. What matters in this exercise are the numbers, not whether it is graphically exactly accurate. To find the equilibrium, we do 80 minus 6q equals 20 plus 4q, and take this to the other side and the q to the other side, collect the q's, gives us 60 equal to 10q, which means q must be equal to 6. So our quantity is 6. Then plug the quantity into either one of the equations up there. Gives us P20 plus 4 times 6, or 44. Let's double check that. 80 minus 6 times 6, also 44. So indeed, the equilibrium price should be at 44.